Good afternoon, students. In this session, we are going to learn about what is mounting and unmounting in ReactJS. That is, what is ReactJS component lifecycle. So, while developing the components in ReactJS, every ReactJS component will undergo 3 stages in its lifecycle. So, first one is mounting, second one is updating or refresh, and third one is unmounting. When coming to the first phase, mounting means putting the elements into the DOM, that is document object model, and updating means a component is updated whenever there is a change in the component state or props. And finally, for unmounting, when a component is removed from the DOM, unmounting phase will take place. Now, for these 3 phases, mounting, updating, and unmounting, there are certain methods in ReactJS. For mounting, we are going to use a constructor that is a default method, and along with component will mount is a primarily method for mounting the ReactJS component. And finally, render is used for displaying the data, and also component did mount method will provides whether the component is mounted or not. And while receiving any properties or while updating the props or updating the components, the methods we use are component will receive props and should component update, component will update, and also component did update are the methods. And finally, only one method for unmounting, that is component will unmount. If at all any errors are there in these 3 phases, component did catch method is used to handle the errors. Now, I quickly open my Visual Studio. So in my Visual Studio, in my index.js, I just imported 2 packages. As I said earlier, import React and import React DOM, and I am going to use a class, that is class product component extends react.component. In this, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to use constructor, that is a default method, and I am going to pass the parameter as props, and I am going to call the superclass constructor of the props and also mentioning certain date. Now, after the closing of constructor, I am going to define another method which is called timer. In that timer, I am going to set the time between mounting and unmounting phases of the component. So here I am going to retrieve the date, and also this dot component will unmount is equal to component will unmount of bind dot this. This method will bind the component to the first state. Now I am going to use a display time method. That display time variable is obtained with the help of timer, that is 1000 seconds. Means between mounting and unmounting or between mounting and refreshing, the server will refresh for every 1000 seconds if at all we are going to set the display time. And I am going to set the state as component mounted, and I am going to provide an alert called component is mounted. And secondly, I am going to use a function that is refresh function. This refresh function will always refreshes whenever we are going to reload the data. And finally, the third method is component will unmount. So here I am going to clear the class interval, means we are going to remove the React component. Hence, we are going to use a method called clear interval. And finally, we are going to set the state as component is unmounted and also provide an alert message called component is unmounted. And finally, we are going to use the render function in order to retrieve the HTML data. I am going to pass some of the data to the return function. So I am going to create 2 buttons. That is, first button is used for unmounting and second button is used for refreshing the data. That is, whenever we are going to load this file, it will defaultly load the React component. Now the main class consists of a div class name is equal container fluid, and I am going to call the product component, which is the main class here. That is, here I am going to use the class component. And finally, I am going to render it the main content. Now I open my command prompt, and here I am going to start the server. So npm start. When once the server is started and it is loaded, it defaultly loads the ReactJS component. Hence, we can get an alert message that component is mounted. So here the deployment server is going to be started, and here you can clearly see that localhost 3000 says component is mounted. Whenever we are going to press OK, it will use 2 buttons, unmount and refresh. And whenever you are going to click the refresh button, it will again mount the component. And finally, we can unmount. So for every mounting and unmounting phase, we can retrieve the time also. So in this way, the ReactJS components undergoes 3 stages: mounting, unmounting, and updating. Thank you.